Well, welcome everybody to the GLREA Thursday evening Zoom. And first thing I'd like to do is, well, thank you all for coming, but also I'd like to thank our sponsors, which include the State Department of Environment, Great Lakes and Energy, Homeland Solar, McNaught and McKay, Iron Ridge Racking, and Harvest Solar. And, tonight we have...
Shrenergy.
Oh, what's that?
Shrenergy as
Shrenergy.
well.
Oh, I forgot Shrenergy. I got to put them on my list. Thank you, John. It's a pleasure to introduce Jeremy tonight. Actually, I think I first met Jeremy when he helped with the electrical work on my first solar system back in 2010. Oak Electric was doing all the electrical work for my first building integrated system. But Jeremy is a electrician and a sales manager for Oak Electric, which does solar systems statewide. And actually, we were talking earlier, they're moving into Vermont and New Hampshire, Ohio. Jeremy's an electrician, the sales manager for Oak Electric. Very knowledgeable. As you'll very soon see, he has solar at his own home, and I think has had it for a long time. And so with that, I'd like to encourage everybody to mute yourself if you haven't done it already. And let me turn it over to Jeremy. Go ahead, Jeremy.
Awesome, man. And I think eventually I'm going to close my video down just so I don't get a little scratchy. Sometimes the internet's a little wonky. But yeah, I guess kind of just tell my story. I was going to start out with how I got into this whole industry and then what I've done at my house. But yeah, so we met John years and years ago. I think you might have called me up directly and told me what you had. And at first I kind of scratched my head because it was more or less like a prototype. I'm like, hey, yeah, we can probably install it. Let's see what happens. So we did. And I know we had to jump through a few hoops because certain things hadn't been totally UL listed yet, but it was an exciting project. And actually, it was funny, about a month ago, I had someone who's putting in that exact type of system call me up, and I got to tell him that story. And he's like, I didn't know if anyone knew about this system. I said, oh no, I was the guy that kind of pioneered it years and years ago. So I'm gonna share my screen, and then I'm also gonna stop my video just so we can make this hopefully a little more smooth. So a little bit of background about me. I got into the electrical field literally straight out of high school. So I started out, literally I took the summer off, started on August 10th of 1998, and I was an apprentice electrician for a few years and worked my way up. So literally August 10th this year is my 25th year at the company. So I've been here a little while, and worked as an apprentice, eventually was kind of coined the generator guy. So I installed all the generators for the company for many, many years. And generators are really what got us into solar. So in 2006, I had a crazy idea to move to Florida and talk to my wife first. We had a sister company down in Florida in the Fort Myers, Naples area called Aspen Electric. And we only did commercial work down there. And I just thought, hey, I could go down there, I could start up the generator side of the business, and I noticed I was starting to top out and pay as a tech here in Michigan. And unfortunately, the economy wasn't doing real well here. And my wife was graduating to be a teacher from Oakland University, and she's like, I can get a job in Michigan easy. So in 2007, we often packed up literally everything in our house and left. And about 2 weeks before we were moving down there, we found out we were going to have our first son, Cameron. It was in this picture years ago. So the going away party was kind of different. We brought our parents over early and said, oh, well, we're moving to Michigan or moving to Florida. But by the way, we're also going to have our first baby. We waited till we were a little older. We were 27, both of us. And we just figured by then we had a good foundation. She had graduated from OU. I was already at that time a master electrician. And so off we went. So while I'm down in Florida, there was a guy in Fort Myers that had an amazing website. He was installing solar all over Fort Myers, Naples area. And I'm busy. I'm the generator guy down there. And I just thought to myself, someday this guy's going to take over. He's going to be putting in solar and batteries, and I'm going to be the dinosaur that goes extinct. So looked all through his site. He had a great site. His site, I hate to say it, it actually kind of taught you the basics of what you needed to do. And so I started doing a little more digging, and I found it, I believe it was called the Florida State Solar Institute. And it was just this government funded deal to push solar. And they were there trying to teach contractors, whoever wanted to know about solar, how to put it in. So I called up my boss up here in Michigan, who owned the company down there, and I said, hey, what do you think about getting into solar? And he's like, yeah, I kind of have been thinking about it. I said, well, there's a place here that does a 1 week long introduction to solar. So what do you think we do it? So we did. It was a cool place. It was over by NASA. It was in Cocoa Beach, and got to meet people from all over the world. There was a guy from Barbados in the class trying to learn about solar, because he did literally what we did. He was installing generators down there, but he says our electric rate's 85 cents a kilowatt hour. That was 16 years ago, and they were 85 cents a kilowatt hour. That number is staggering. Met another guy from Ghana, and he was over in Africa. His idea was he was going to go literally to village, putting in solar. So the class was pretty good, but it was more or less learning how to use an abacus. It was stuff that I'll never use again, but it got me all the fundamentals of why the solar panels are working the way they are. And in 2007, very end of it, literally I moved back, got home the day before Christmas with a huge moving truck, and came back to Oak. And one of the things that happened while I was down there is, they kind of told me, well, we gave your job away up in Michigan. If you come back, what if you just do sales? And I said, yeah, let's do it. So hit the ground running early 2008, and we started talking about solar at some home shows. And 2008 really wasn't a great year for Michigan, but we got our first job installing solar. And literally when we put that system in, she was the second person connected to the DTE grid. It was kind of comical when DTE came out to test everything. Back then, they literally send one of their engineers and meet you on site. And 4 engineers show up to turn on this disconnect and test the solar. And well, I'm an electrician. We always like to poke fun at engineers. And I kind of looked at them and I said, how many engineers does it take to turn on this disconnect? And they laughed. They said, well, this is one of the first couple we wanted to see it. And so fast forward a couple of years from there, well, not even a couple of years, about 6 months later, I just decided, you know what, if I'm going to be doing this stuff, installing this stuff, I really want to have it on my house too. And what happened was the utilities brought out some pretty big incentive programs. So Detroit Edison had a rebate program, and then so an upfront rec payment, and then a long-term rec payment. And Consumers Energy, where I'm at, so I live just outside of Fenton, a little town called Linden. And we had the feed-in tariff. And if you're not familiar with that, what they were doing initially is they were paying 65 cents a kilowatt hour for all the energy that came out of your solar. And none of it went to my house initially. It went right through the meter. So I would get a check every month for that production. And then the energy would flow back into my house, and I'd buy it. Back then it was about 11 cents a kilowatt hour. So I reached out to a bank. I'm a young guy. I think I was 28 years old at the time, almost 29. And I said, I want to put solar on my house. Here's what I'm doing. Literally, I'm just going to take a check from consumers for the next this many years and hand it to you. How much will you give me? And banks were like, yeah, we don't know about solar. We're not really interested. So I ended up getting a small loan. I didn't go as big as I wanted to, but I started out with the system you see behind the big snowman. And it was a 3.28 kW system. So now, to me, that's a small system. But I told by Consumers Energy, I was literally the very first home in Genesee County to be connected to the grid, which was kind of cool. And had that system for many years. So the feed-in tariff, I can't remember if it was a 10 or a 12-year contract. And what they did initially is they would credit my account, and it would get dispersed to both my gas and my electric bill. So that little 3 kW, it would produce about $210 a month average for my home, which back then paid both my gas and my electric bill. Well, then the utilities had some issues, and they didn't want to actually credit my entire account. So what they would do is they would just write me a check every month for it, which was a headache at times. I'd have to remind them, hey guys, you owe me some money. And then we would just pay our bill separately. So we decided it was probably time to add on. So what we did initially is we built a garage out back. So I had a garage attached to the house, but I always wanted more space. I'm an electrician, so I got a lot of tools, I got all the toys. I like to work with my hands. So I built the shop out back, and we completely covered the roof with solar. I actually set it up where when I put the solar on the roof, there's only just a couple inch gap all the way around. And that was strategic. What I was trying to do is make that roof last a long, long time. So I guess my theory there is if it's not exposed to sunlight, it's not exposed to the weather, that roof will potentially last a lot longer. So we'll see what happens. And all that energy flows back into the house. Still had the feed-in tariff, which is a big chunk of it. But now, instead of just covering my electric bill, I was actually getting paid. And that went on for a few years. And well, then we decided to put a pool in. And to be honest, solar was good to me. So I was comfortable enough. I put an in-ground pool in. And when we put the pool in, I did things a little different. Instead of doing a gas heater, I went with a heat pump. And it was funny, I had to argue with my pool guy to put the heat pump in. He's like, no, they don't really work good in Michigan. I said, look at my house. I've got solar everywhere. I can't have the gas heater. I said, I'm the solar guy. I want a heat pump. And a lot of people are like, well, why didn't you do a solar thermal system? Well, I'm the guy that does photovoltaics and make electricity. And my thought there was, if I put the photovoltaics up, they'll produce the energy for the pool, but I'll also get to use them in the wintertime too. And it's worked well. So the heat pump, when I compare that to my sister-in-law, literally has the exact same size pool, was installed by the same pool guy. He convinced her to do a gas heater. She's spending like $400 to $500 a month to heat her pool. With my heat pump, it's completely powered on what's sitting on these two pergolas. So if you notice the big one that's right next to the pool, and then if we zoom in over on the deck, I've got another smaller one that has 6 panels on it. What's on top of those panels or on those pergolas literally powers the entire pool. And years later, I talked to my pool guy about 2 years ago, and he says, all my new pools now have heat pumps. I finally convinced him that it made a lot more sense. So, yeah, I mean, it's been awesome. The pool is completely powered by the sun. And then with the changes in the rules a few years back, so you had true net metering where you were buying and selling at the same price. Well, I got kicked out of that program about a year and a half ago. So I ended up updating my pool pump to a variable speed pump. And what's kind of cool about that pump is you can program it to slow down at certain times. So all summer long, it slows itself down at 2 o'clock, which is when our peak rate goes into effect. And it runs at a very low RPM until 7 o'clock, and then it ramps back up to full speed. Well, in turn, what happens is the heat pump senses that there's a low flow and it shuts off. And the idea I had there is I'm trying not to buy any expensive electricity during that peak time. If I'm going to buy any power from the grid, I'm going to power it off-peak rates, which are a lot cheaper. So now one of the things we did when we did the pergola with solar is we actually took the solar panels off the front of the house and we moved them. We put those on the pergolas. And then what I ended up doing is replacing it with a newer, better system on the front of the house. So if we look at this, if we split the screen, over on the right, I got 3.28 kW, or excuse me, over on the left, I've got 3.28 kW. Over on the right, that's 6.9 kW of sun power panels. Only took up about 3 more feet of roof space. So I got a lot more energy out of that area. And the evergreen panels I have, they're great panels, but one of the things that really bugged me is when I put them up back in early 2009, the manufacturer, I think they were manufacturing in Saginaw, Massachusetts, and Germany. And a year after I put them up, they went bankrupt. So that 25-year warranty that I had on those panels disappeared. So when I did my second and my third system on the house, I picked a manufacturer that'd been around a long, long time. SunPower's been around since 1985. And I was really comfortable that they were going to be around for the long haul. Plus, got a lot more energy out of them too. And what was comical is my wife's like, well, why don't you put the black panels on the roof? It's hard to see in these two photos, but on the left, those panels are kind of a cobalt steel color, blue, versus the black panels on the right. And I'm like, you really like the black panels better? I said, it didn't really bug me one way or the other. But she says, yeah, I'd rather have those on the front of the house. So off we went. And then kind of looking through these different photos, I'm going to show you some different stuff. The pergolas, you may notice they're perfectly flat. So if you are considering doing something like that in your yard, don't make it perfectly flat. When I first put these pergolas up, I wasn't planning on putting solar on them, but then I kind of changed my mind. So I don't have any new photos of it, but last year I actually put a slight tilt to the pergola and I put a steel deck roof on top of it. Reason I did that is I would get water that would sit on top of the solar panels, and then it would fade away and it would leave watermarks and kind of a dirty stain on the solar panel. So I'd get up there once a year, walk around squeegeeing it off. Well, now with the slight angle I have, enough to get water to move, it stays pretty clean. And putting the steel decking underneath of it, now when we're sitting at the pool and the kids want to swim on a rainy day, because they will do that, I don't get raindrops on me. So yeah, if you're going to do that, I would definitely recommend putting something underneath your solar panels, because they're not watertight. There's little gaps between them. And then I always like to point out kind of the journey that I've had. So if you notice in the pictures, you'll see my garden. So I like to show that off because it's solar powered too, except for it's making food for me instead of electricity. But one of the interesting parts of my job is it's an adventure. I get to see some pretty amazing houses. I've been to an organic garlic farm down in Ann Arbor. I've got a customer up in Montrose that he raises ostriches. So anytime I see some wild operation like that, I always, give me the 10-minute tour. And they do. They're always excited to show off their stuff. And, the ostrich farmer, I was able to see the incubator that he has. He ended up giving me an ostrich egg, which was pretty cool. And then I got another customer that was at his house. This was like 2-3 years ago. I walk up to his home and the whole front yard, the fence, he's got a split rail fence, and he's got fruit trees that are flat. And I don't know exactly what the term is for that type of flat tree, but I'd seen them here and there. Well, he had like 25 of these trees going all the way around the front perimeter of his yard. And I'm looking at all the fruit, and I kind of picked his brain for 15 minutes about it. Hey, how do you do this? How do you do that? And the reason I did that is I've got fruit trees all over my yard. It was an idea I heard years ago called an edible landscape. So I started kind of incorporating that into my yard to the point where when I first moved in, it took me 45 minutes to mow. And even though my yard has gotten smaller, I've got so many more obstacles to mow around. It takes me an hour now to mow. But I've got fruit trees like crazy. I've got a peach tree that last year I literally pulled over 700 peaches off of it. I've got a plum tree that this year is going to go nuts. I actually had to thin it. I pulled about 200 plums off this one tree. And then got the idea to get rid of all the wood. Sorry, I'm bouncing all over the place here. I'm a bit of a squirrel. Got rid of the wood containers here just because eventually that stuff rots away. And I was at a home where they had done cattle troughs for their raised garden. I'm looking at that. To be honest, my job at times can be costly because I go out there and I get all these ideas and then I want to bring them home. And sometimes I see what they cost and sometimes I just do it anyway. And this, to me, this is the 50-year garden. That stuff's not going to rot away. I've seen those cattle troughs and they look like they're 50 years old sitting out there in people's yard. So just put this all together. It literally runs off of my solar panels. The sprinkler system that's there is it's powered by my well. And met another guy that's doing gardening on straw bales. I won't do that again. That was not what I expected. It was a very messy job. And then the last thing I really want to talk about is the transition that I had when I went from net metering to the distributed generation. So I used to get a 1-for-1 exchange. So literally I was using the grid as a battery. So I would take the energy that I wasn't using on a nice sunny day, I'd sell it back to them at the same price that I would buy it back from them. So used to be, I didn't have an electric bill. Well, a year and a half ago when I got pushed back into distributed generation because my 10-year grandfather part went away, I now what's happening is really I would say I get rid of about 9 months of electric bills and I have about 3 months of normal electric bills. And a lot of people have looked at my home, they're like, why do you have so much solar? Well, I transitioned more and more of my house over to use electricity. So I've got a little over 17,000 watts of solar. House is only about 1,500 square feet, but I use a lot of power. So the problem I'm having now is I'm selling a lot of energy to the grid at a lesser amount, and I'm getting that bill. So I do have a pretty good sized battery system in my back garage, but it's not one that has the capability to sell to the grid. So now what I'm doing is installing this. And this is about 15 feet away from me in my garage. And this is a new battery. This is my new, it's a Simplify battery system. And the idea with this is it will store up some energy that I can then use at night or use during the day whenever I need it, rather than pulling energy from the grid or selling energy to the grid. And most importantly, if we have a power outage, I can use this to power some of my house. I'm not going to power everything. Even though this thing has the capability, it's two 6,000 watt inverters, so it's 12,000 watts. And it has a surge capability of 24,000 watts. It told me it would start my air conditioner up. I'm just going to use it to run the basics. I just think that's easier on the battery. So, and that's one of the things I've told people is, you can sometimes run your air conditioning on solar with batteries off grid, but it's not necessarily a great idea. We're also kind of funny. We lived in Florida, so I think our blood got thinned out a little bit. Even today, it's like 83, 84 degrees. We don't have the air on. Now, if my father-in-law comes on, we'll turn the air on early for him because he'll whine. But yeah, we got the pool, got the windows open. I've got a whole house attic fan that's very efficient that will suck air in from the outside at about 9 o'clock at night. And really haven't noticed we don't need the air too much. So this is my next project, is hooking up this battery to it. And then I guess the only other photo I would throw out here is I just took a picture of the meter. This is in my back garage. This is an old analog meter back when I was selling SREX, which I just kind of gave up on that. And it's just about to jump over 86,000 kilowatt hours. And that's just one of the 3 systems that I've had. So my guess is I've probably made over 200,000 kilowatt hours with my solar, but I quit counting years ago. And I guess that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. So we left a lot of time to talk. If you got questions, and I'm all ears.
Well, thank you, Jeremy. That was very interesting, kind of how your history and, not everybody might be familiar with SREX. So why don't you stop the screen sharing, but why don't you explain what an SREC is?
So the first thing I'd say is an SREC's a headache.
Yeah, okay.
So years ago, there was a program, I want to say it was Illinois, Ohio, there's a couple different ones. And in essence, just think of them like a carbon credit. The utilities were buying SREC, so you could sell those to different states. New Jersey had a crazy SREC program, but I found out by the time I did all the paperwork and all the headaches, I'm like, yeah, it's really not worth it. A lot of people are still quoting you doing SREX, but I don't like to pitch anyone on SREX because I don't know how it's going to really work for you, if that market's even going to be there. So.
Okay. Now, if you'd like to ask a question, just go under reactions and raise your hand. And then we'll, questions for Jeremy.
Jeremy, this is John Freeman. Maybe you could talk about what you see as the market for solar right now with the current climate, with DTE consistently increasing the rates. We still have the GG in place. We have now electric cars that are becoming much more popular that can be powered by solar. So maybe just give us a sense of how you see the market, and do you see the market expanding as more people are learning about the benefits of solar and how they can save money and contribute to a cleaner environment?
Yeah, absolutely. So John was asking me before everybody hopped on, are we busy? We're still busy. Even with net metering going away, distributed generation, it's not great, but it's not horrible. I mean, it still works. Now, what we have noticed is when it went away, we got busier. And I think a lot of people got irritated with what the utilities were trying to do. And I would say 3 out of 4 systems we install now have batteries because of that. Everyone always tells me they want to go off the grid, but going off the grid it's a different lifestyle. So if you stay on the grid and get rid of 9 months of your electric bills instead of all 12, I think that makes a lot of sense. But a lot of factors. So like, for example, the rates. Rates are going up on interest. Our bank loans, we used to see 3%, 4%, 5% loans. We're up around like 7 to 8%, or maybe even 9% loans. But if you run the numbers, it can still make sense. So when I first put solar in, the rates were horrible for it. Banks didn't want to give you a 15-year loan. When I put my solar in, it cost me about $50 more a month to have my solar than what I was paying the utility. But the way I looked at it, mine was a 12-year loan. For 12 years, I'm going to pay about $50 a month to someday get rid of most of my electric bill. And what I had to realize too is that $50 a month was going to slowly shrink down as the electric rate went up. And I figured somewhere around like the 7-8 year mark, what I would have thrown away with the utility was literally what I was going to pay on my bank loan. So yeah, I mean, we're still busy. Solar's still going in. There's some exciting stuff I'm hearing about in Lansing. I saw one today that they're talking about some potentially an incentive of $500 per kW and then $350 per kilowatt hour of battery storage. EVs are, it's going to be a whole different ball game. They scare me and they excite me all at the same time. The scary part of them is, and this is the guy who's doing the electrical, the guys who dealing with the grid, we don't have the capacity for it. So I want you, next time there's a 95-degree day, I want you to go to on DTE's outage map, and I want you to look at 4 o'clock and watch what starts happening. I do this. Why? Because I figure out which neighborhoods are getting power outages first, because that's where we're going to send the flyer to for a generator. So what's happening is that huge stress that you're having on the grid, we got to do something about it. And that's one of the reasons I'm putting solar on my house is someday I want it to power my electric car. A lot of the new electric cars that are coming out, and I wish I would have coined the term bi-directional charging years ago. I told that to a Ford engineer, and now I hear it all over the place. I'm like, you know what? That was mine, but didn't copyright it. So a lot of these new vehicles that are going to have bi-directional charging, that's exciting. You know, like the battery I've got in my garage is a 15 kilowatt hour battery. The battery that's in the Chevy Bolt, I want to say it's 66 kilowatt hours. So you plug that into your house and you can use that storage capacity, or the utility can use that storage capacity. There's some pretty amazing things that are going to happen, but it's scary too. We got to do it right or we're going to have some issues. That's one of the reasons I don't think generators are going to go away real soon. Generac, for example, quietly about 3 years ago, made all of their generators smart grid ready. And then they went out and they bought Ecobee, the guys that build thermostats. And I can't confirm this, but I think what they're doing here is they're going to set it up where that Ecobee is going to communicate with the generator, and they can allow the utility to turn the generator on and take that home off the grid during a peak time. So literally the whole house is interruptible. Windmill Cookie Factory down in Livonia has had this for probably 30 years. They had a 2 megawatt generator that sat there. They were an interruptible system. Now, they didn't have an Ecobee automatically turning on the generator. What they would get is they would get a phone call from DTE during a peak day, and they would say, hey, go ahead and fire your generator up, take yourself offline. And the way I understand it is they would pay for the fuel costs. DTE gave the factory a break on their utility bill because it was an interruptible factory, and DTE paid for that generator. So it was a pretty amazing program. So like I said, I'm excited and I'm a little nervous to see where it goes. You know, at the end of the day, I hate to say it, but the more power outages we have, the busier I'm going to be. So if we have electric cars, I'm going to be selling solar. I'm going to be putting in car chargers, and I'm probably going to be putting in more generators too. Fun fact that I heard about 2.5 months ago about Michigan in general. We have 2 times more power outages than any other state, and it takes 5 times longer to restore the power. So we are usually in the top 3 Generac dealers every single year. And the other guys that are wherever the hurricane was or the forest fire that you're always scratching their head saying, how are you guys so busy with generators? We have a lot of power outages here. So I see a bunch of hands now. So
Yeah, go ahead, Olga.
Thanks. This is a really interesting. I loved seeing your presentation, Jeremy. So I moved here from Massachusetts a couple years ago. I still have a house there, and I put solar on my house in Massachusetts in 2018. I used SREX, and I paid, because I lived in a cold part of the state, a little bit colder than this part of southeastern Michigan, but not much. And anyway, the house was fully wired for electric because there were no gas lines there, and it was built, you know, after So a lot of people in Massachusetts still heat with oil burners, but it was built at a point where they decided not to go for that. So the long and short of it was, with my system, I paid for power 5 or 6 months out of the year. And it was great. And I have SREX. I'm still getting money from SREX. It's not a lot because they lowered the amount, but so I'm wondering here, I'm about to buy a house here and I want to put a solar system, on the roof to kick it off. But this house, like many in Ann Arbor, is gas dependent for heat. So I have 2 questions, Jeremy. The first one is, what's a cost-effective way to plan for transitioning from gas heat to a system, that my solar system would support? And the other question is, can you please speak to, I know you talked about your battery system. Can you just give a recommendation or kind of little comparison about several different battery systems? Thank you.
Sure. So your first question, that transition. So Ann Arbor's got an initiative, they want everybody to have a heat pump. However, they want everybody to have a heat pump with electric backup furnace. In my opinion, that is a horrible idea. I think it's a great idea because what it will do is it will push the grid on a real cold day. It'll knock the grid out. So people that have electric backup heat typically will see in the wintertime, if it's a cold winter where your heat pump can't keep up, you'll see $1,000 a month electric bill. So I think the happy median there is to do a heat pump with gas backup. You do a 99% efficient furnace. If we have a winter like we had last winter, you probably won't use the furnace. You'll probably do the heat pump the entire time. If we have a colder winter, you're going to use the furnace when you need to because the heat pump is not as effective when it goes below 0. Some of them will go down to -20, but it's more efficient to use a gas furnace at that point. If you've got a variable speed, like we do furnaces. So the furnace we typically install, it'll ramp from 1% to 100% up and down, depending on exactly what you need. So it's super efficient. So I think that's what I would look at first. Do you have a boiler at your house or is it a furnace?
It's a furnace.
Oh, it is. Yeah. I think,
yeah, 5-year-old.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Now, a lot of people have a boiler. And I actually had a guy that we just did in Commerce. He wanted to get rid of the boiler. I said, your boiler, even if it's 40 years old, it's still a pretty good unit. I said, let's just put in mini splits, let them do the majority of the work. And then if you ever have to, you can fall back on the steam boiler if needed. Your second question is on the batteries. So we have done a multitude of different batteries. Like what I have in my back garage, it's a Schneider inverter. It's got very large like truck batteries. They're about 200. And of course, the day I unloaded them was the day my son wasn't around. So I unloaded all of them myself. It was fun. But those batteries, they're workhorses. They're an awesome battery, but they are a lot of maintenance. I would not sell those to a normal person because normal people would probably forget to water them and then your batteries blow up. So what I was always taught with batteries like that is you sell someone cheap batteries first because they're going to blow them up and then let them buy the good batteries next. So that's the old stuff. Now the new stuff, all the lithium batteries, just what I would say is dig into the manufacturer, make sure they've built a lot. We do a ton of Tesla batteries. I have a Simplify battery system that's in my garage. The only reason I went with Simplify instead of Tesla is because I've got a 20 kW generator that I want to incorporate into that mix. Tesla doesn't work well with a generator. Otherwise, you'd see Teslas all over my garage. But Tesla's a great battery. Simplify is a great battery. There's a ton of batteries out there. SunPower, the brand of panels we use, they have a pretty awesome battery. But don't go too small. I've seen some people installing little like 5 kilowatt-hour batteries. That's not going to do what you want it to. Even my 15 kilowatt-hour, what I warn people is, everyone always asks me, well, what is that? How much power is that? It's like asking somebody, well, how fast do you drink a bottle of water? How fast do I drink a bottle of water? Me, I down the bottle in about 30 seconds. I just have always been that way. My kids laugh at me when I drink a bottle of water. They might sip on it all day long. Actually, they'll probably leave it on the counter and never finish it. So it's the same thing with batteries. I don't know how you're going to use it, but for most people, 15 kilowatt hours is probably about 24-hour storage with zero sunlight. Well, zero sunlight, we don't see that very often. That's the middle of a thunderstorm, and that's a blizzard. So back in February when we had the ice storms, we put in solar for the mayor of Ann Arbor with a battery. And after that storm, he sent me an awesome email. He ran for 5 days straight off his battery and his solar in what I would consider subpar weather. And I was like, that was such a cool email to get. So yeah, if you're going to do solar, I would highly recommend putting in batteries. I didn't have batteries on my system for about 10 years, and it would kill me. I'd hear my generator kick on, and I know I've got enough solar. I can do this without the generator. And that's what's going to happen is my solar and my battery will run first. And if for some reason I'm in a blizzard and I haven't seen the sun in 3 or 4 days, then the generator will charge those batteries, probably charge them up in about 4 or 5 hours. And then I can run again for potentially a day or two.
Well, Jeremy, too, what's interesting, most people wait till their natural gas furnace dies and then they look for, maybe to replace it with natural gas or maybe a heat pump these days. But from what you just said, actually, it's not a bad strategy if you have especially an older natural gas furnace, maybe to go with the heat pump because you can keep using natural gas furnace as your backup.
Oh, yeah. Well, and you look at the tax credits on a heat pump versus an air conditioner. To me, it doesn't make sense not to do the heat pump. I've got customers that have never even heard about a heat pump, and I'll go out on an appointment doing an HVAC estimate for them. And you got to nicely nudge them in that direction. But I'm like, I explain to them, like, the heat pump is literally like an air conditioner that can run in reverse. And it's much more efficient. It's going to drive your electric bill up a little bit, but it's going to drop your gas bill drastically. And then if I can put some solar up there, guess what? We can offset that. So
Dave, go ahead with your question.
Yeah, this is just to follow up on the battery question. Have you noticed a trend as far as pricing of batteries goes?
we saw a huge drop when Tesla kind of came into the market. So when the Tesla Powerwall became available, like if we go back 3-4 years ago, the batteries we were putting in then were in the $35,000 to $40,000 range. And I would actually try to talk people out of it. And a few people would still talk me into it. But I would just tell them, wait a couple years, just let's see what happens. Well, when the Powerwall came out, I feel initially they were selling the Powerwall cheaper than what they were manufacturing it for, just because he was trying to get it out there. And now it went up a little bit in cost. But installed typically, if you do a Powerwall with solar, you're about 16,000 for a single Powerwall. You're about 25,000 for 2 Powerwalls, and it's an awesome battery. Is there stuff that's a little cheaper? Yeah, there's stuff that's a little bit cheaper. You're going to get a little bit smaller battery. There's stuff that's more expensive too, but I have seen the cost go down. I don't know how much more they can go down though, just because the equipment you're dealing with. It's like generators. Generators for us, they went down in the Y2K scare right after that. So back in 2000, generator costs dramatically were cheaper, and then they steadily rose. And if you look at in the last 3 years, the generator install cost has gone up about 40%. I get people all the time. They're like, I got a quote on this in 2017 and it was this. I'm like, well, it's a different world now. So all material, wire, I don't buy a lot of wire because I'm not a tech anymore, but I'm buying wire to wire up my battery system. And I couldn't believe the cost of a roll of cable that I would have bought 7-8 years ago. Would have been about $100 for the roll. It's $480 for that roll of cable. You go into Home Depot now and they have all the wire in cages locked up. It's just, it's crazy. So
go ahead, Dale.
Yeah, thanks for explaining your system, Jeremy. I'm not sure that I followed. It sounded like you had more than one inverter battery system, like you had a Schneider one and then the newer simplified ones. Can you explain how those are all hooked up to the grid or to the not, and to which arrays and stuff?
Yeah, so the new Simplify inverters, those are not connected yet. Those are actually going to replace 3 old SMA inverters that I have. So if you look at my house, the way it's set up right now, I have 3 SMA inverters, I have a Fronius inverter, and I have a Schneider inverter. I don't have any micro inverters. Well, now when I upgrade, 3 of the SMA inverters are going away, and which it's kind of good timing because my SMA, they're almost 15 years old. That was about the life expectancy for that inverter. So what I'll have when I'm all done is I'll have 2 6,000 watt, call them simplify inverters. And then I'll have the one Fronius inverter out back. And I think I'm going to decommission my old Schneider battery system. I don't really need that anymore. The reason I've got the 2 inverters in the back garage, the Fronius used to run the whole thing. But what I did is I took half of that system that's on the back garage, ran it into the batteries. The other half is still running through the old inverter. So my system is extremely confusing. I literally wrote a little one-line diagram. So if I die, the next electrician, he can swear at me when I'm in the ground. Because
yeah.
don't ever buy an electrician's house. We do things that we probably shouldn't.
If you have that handy, that would explain it, the one-line diagram.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I don't know if you saw my email, but yeah, if you want to shoot me an email, I'll send you that. It's
Okay, sure. Thanks.
chicken scratch, but it'll make sense if you understand one lines.
Go ahead, Abraham.
I wonder whether you've thought of rewiring part of your house for just DC and running part of the infrastructure on DC totally, let's say, off grid. But why
Well,
convert?
I kind of don't see the point with your inverters. I mean, your efficiency in most inverters is anywhere from like 97 to 98%. And you just rewiring a house for that kind of stuff. Being an electrician, the AC stuff just makes far more sense for me. And it's so much easier to get AC appliances. So even like we've got a cabin up the UP that I'm busy doing some stuff there, and everything will be AC just because it's easier. So, and with the efficiency of the inverters, there's hardly any loss anyway.
On the other hand, you end up with a lot of DC devices. I mean, certainly your lighting and your efficient motors. What is still really dependent on AC?
Right. No, I've just found it's always easier. And it's kind of the trends I've seen in the whole electrical industry. I mean, when you look at your solar panels, a lot of the newer solar panels are integrated with a microinverter that's AC. So, yeah. And it's you will get some guys that still like to play around with DC, but yeah, I just never been a fan of that.
Can
Go
you
ahead,
explain-
Ray. Oh, go ahead, Abraham. You have another question.
I don't know what this what was it called, SREX stuff is. Can you explain that a little bit more? It's I don't know.
SREC, it stands for Solar Renewable Energy Credit. And the simplest thing to look at it is it's like a carbon credit. It's not that you're selling your electricity. It's that you're selling the fact that you're making green electricity. And that's kind of what was happening with the feed-in tariff, with the DTE. DTE has 20-year contracts with a lot of their customers where they pay them 11 cents per kilowatt hour, or there were some smaller ones out there for renewable energy credits over the next 20 years. So DTE, and John might be able to explain this better, but now DTE can show that, those systems, even though they're privately owned by homeowners and businesses, we own all of those green carbon credits called SRECs.
That's right. The utilities, because of the portfolio standards, the utilities are obligated to have a certain percentage of electricity from renewable sources. And the way that's documented is RECs, renewable energy certificates, which is each one is worth 1 megawatt hour. And so typically they're getting their RECs from either wind farms they own or solar arrays that are private developments that sell the power to the utility. But if they can buy RECs somewhere else, those can be used too, as long as they're within the kind of Michigan system. So
that's still an opportunity. I mean, I'm exporting. I have 2 Tesla batteries, and I got they got loaded from about sort of the beginning of April. And then from there on, I start feeding the grid, and I know my neighbors use it all.
Well, it's not even the fact that some of it's going to the grid. It's the fact that you're making solar energy. So like that meter that I showed, that is all of the energy coming out of that inverter before it touches the house. So every bit of it, that 86,000 kilowatt hours, if you look at that, that's 86 RECs that I have right there. If you go on, you might want to write this down. It's pretty simple. It's SREC Trade. That's the site that we used to do it through. I think they're still around today, but they purchase the wrecks and sell them to other areas. But it's just, it got to be a real pain that I just kind of gave up on it. I just was like, yeah, for the little bit, $100 a year that I was probably going to get from it, I'm not worried about it.
So DTE isn't doing them directly.
DTE did have a program, Solar Currents, where they were purchasing, they would give you what was called an upfront rec payment, which it used to be $2.40 a watt, which was just crazy. We had people from other states moving here to sell solar because we had the best program in the country. And then just out of the blue, it went away. I think it was May 10th. I remember that date. That was a bad day for me because I had probably $500,000 worth of solar projects that stopped that day and could not be installed because the program was done. But yeah, they were buying those SRECs. That was how they were doing it.
You know, related to this is, you know, a lot of you know JLREA intervenes in Michigan Public Service Commission cases. And John Richter, who's primary witness, had a good idea, which I think John can kind of explain related to this issue.
Yeah, it's the idea is that, as Jeremy indicated, if you're producing more solar than you can use, you're exporting that extra solar electricity back to the grid, back to DTE for them to reuse. So they literally will pay you the current distributed generation rate, about 50% of the retail rate, and then they sell it to your neighbors at the full retail rate. So they're getting the benefit of your solar electricity, but they haven't been paying for the corresponding SREC that's associated with that electricity. So John Richter, a GLREA member, last fall in one of the rate cases, he made the argument that DTE ought to be paying for the SRECs associated with the solar electricity that homeowners are exporting back to the grid. And the Public Service Commission agreed, and they required in another case, which is currently happening right now, that a proposal be developed by DTE to start paying for those RECs. And I don't know the details because, as John Sarver indicated, John Richter is the one that's kind of leading the charge on this. But I will have John Richter type up a couple of paragraphs about this SREC case, and I will include it in a forthcoming newsletter that I will send out to the entire membership. So everybody can kind of keep abreast about what's happening with this, because even though I essentially agree with Jeremy, I'm not sure that the market is that big to make a ton of money on it. But on the other hand, if DTE is getting the benefit of solar electricity from solar owners, they ought to be paying for the REC that's associated with it as well. So.
Yeah, you know, part of the context is we ran into the situation, you know, the utilities have these voluntary green programs with large industry, General Motors and Ford and everybody. And there was an issue with, oh, gee, we're not sure that we can find all the power, the solar power that to provide these, you know, RECs to industry, which wants to kind of become green, right? And so John was thinking, John Richter, he was thinking, oh my goodness, you know, they're having a hard time getting, you know, solar RECs. You got all these customers out there generating solar on their roofs. Why don't we have them buy solar RECs from their customers, and then they can kind of resell that to General Motors so they can be green. And so that's kind of one of the reasons that it became kind of an issue. And we're hopeful, because the Public Service Commission has been very favorable on this issue, that something will come of it. And now who knows how much they'll pay for the SRECs, or RECs, but well, it's worth pursuing, I think. Dre, go ahead with your question.
Hey, how you doing there? I wanted to hear more about the heat pumps. I always thought that maybe our temperature, I was told that they were best under where we have moderate temperature changes and shifts. Are there any, like, I guess, companies you suggest, or any brands you suggest?
So we use Lennox. Lennox and Mitsubishi are pretty much your top of the line heat pumps. But it used to be, you go back 10, 15 years ago, heat pumps did not make sense in Michigan. We were too cold. Now the heat pumps are cold weather heat pumps. So they'll go down to -20. Now you still get to a point where it might still make more sense to use your natural gas furnace. But what I tell a lot of people, even people that never thought about heat pumps, I'm like, you know what? You could do the air conditioner, but if you do the furnace and the heat pump, and let's just say 10 years down the road, your furnace has an issue, you still have backup heat through that heat pump. Even on a -20-degree day, your house is not going to freeze. So yeah, they can still work down to some pretty severe temperatures. But yeah, the rule of thumb years ago was like North Carolina and South, that's where you saw heat pumps. But now, yeah, you can put them in the cold weather, no problem. There's other brands too, but Mitsubishi was always #1. This year, Lennox actually just surpassed them. So
Okay. Do you service Detroit area?
yeah.
Okay, I got a small project that I'm doing it in, well, I love to get your email, but I'm doing it in stages. And
Yeah.
I'm building an office, and the first step is to, container home. And the
cool.
old basement that the house used to be, it already gives me my 10 feet down, right? So I'm gonna go down a little bit further, and hopefully a heat pump is part of that, backfill it all, and go from there. The next part will be a solar array, and then the next part will be the batteries. And I'm hoping to pursue a whole microgrid. So we'll see, but it's piece by piece. And I'm a electrician, but I'm a utility electrician.
Oh
But
yeah,
that's where I'm shifting to.
you do the big power, I do the little power.
Yeah, but that's where I'm trying to shift to microgrids.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yen, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing your name correct. Go ahead.
Yes, so thank you for letting me join this Zoom meeting. It's very interesting, but mostly I do not understand most of it because it's way above my level. All of this electricity is just very puzzling. But I would like to know, like we live in a house that is pretty old, 1950s house, and we have a gas furnace. So what is the start point to switch to power, solar power, and can it accommodate old house like this?
Yeah. So
Other things like heat pumps, people don't understand.
oh yeah. Well, so what I always do when I walk into a house is a lot of people want to go right to solar. And I would love to sell you solar, but if I walk into your house and you have an air conditioner that's 30 years old, you got a furnace that's 30 years old, I always talk to you first about the lowest hanging fruit. Let's make the house more efficient first before we put solar in. So yeah, if you've got an older furnace, so like your furnace and air conditioner, average life of those in Michigan is 18 years. So if it's older than that, might be time to consider doing an upgrade. Do that first and then put the solar in. And I mean, like when you're looking at my solar, the simplest way to look at what I have, I would say is if you had a bill that's about $300 a month, my solar is probably going to cover about 250 of that. So for most people, my solar is oversized. You don't need that. And do not try to go to 100% of what you need. Don't even try to go to 80% of what you need. I'm telling people right now, I think 50 to 70% makes the most sense. And what I mean by that is if you're spending a $200 a month on your electric bill, not your gas bill, your electric bill, try to cover 50 to 70% of that. And the reason I say that is you're going to sell some power back to the grid. Even with a battery, there's no way out of that. But if you put a system in that's too large, you're going to sell a lot of that energy back to the grid. And that's because if you look at the way we use power, we use most of our power in the evening. Your solar's pumping out energy, it's maximum right in the middle of the day. So you're going to sell power back to the grid. So don't ever try to go after 100% of your bill. There's some companies that are pitching that right now. Without a battery, they're trying to do that. And the numbers just aren't going to work the way you want it to. So, and be careful about your installers too. Try to use somebody that's local. There's a lot of companies from out of state that are jumping into Michigan right now, especially if these talks of the $500 credit per KW, if that happens, you will find a lot of companies coming from out of state. problem with that is like we've just had with Power Home. A lot of people know who Power Home is. They came into the state, did a bunch of solar, and we're now dealing with the aftermath of all these systems that don't work correctly, and Power Home's gone. And now these people are finding out that they may have to pay thousands to get stuff fixed. And that's a headache. You know, we're a brick and mortar store. We're in Waterford. Like I said, I've been with the company almost 25 years now. So yeah, find somebody that's been around a while that's been doing this. And you know, I'd love to do the whole state of Michigan, but we try to stay local to you know, the Metro Detroit area. We go about 100 miles. I did tell John that we are looking expanding into Grand Rapids and Traverse City, but we'll go a ways for solar. But I'd rather work around my house. I don't want to drive 3 hours to a project. So
Yeah, I'm in Ann Arbor, so.
oh, there you go.
probably-
Yeah, you're right around the corner from us. Yeah, it's funny is 80% of the solar I've installed is in Washtenaw County. So
Oak Electric
Okay.
is a GLREA member, so in Great Lakes Renewable Energy Association has a lot of solar installers, Michigan solar installers as members, and we have a business directory. So if anybody on the Zoom is kind of looking for an installer, you can go to our website, which is the 3 W's, glrea.org, find our business directory and look under solar installers, and you'll see about 25 solar installers, and you know, contact 2 or 3 and get bids, kind of ask a lot of questions. But our members have been Michigan installers for a long time, and like Oak Electric are very experienced. And so beware of the person knocking on your door. That's you don't want to have somebody walk into your kitchen and sell you a solar system.
And if you're not a member, individual member of GLREA, we would encourage everyone who's not a member to become a member as well. You can go on the website and look under the membership tab. Dues start at $30 a year, so it's a pretty good bargain.
Yeah, both business and individual members. Craig, go ahead with your question.
Thanks. I have a small solar system. I have a 28-year-old gas furnace, and with, you know, hearing about the Inflation Reduction Act, I think that's the one it's in with the rebate stuff for heat pumps. I decided I need to get a heat pump before next winter. I use very little air conditioning. Anyway, but I keep running into, at least what I found so far is nobody can tell me that, oh, the rebate thing will be figured out in time before next winter, because the state needs to do stuff and to figure out how it's all going to work. Do you know anything about that?
oh yeah, no, the rebates are simple. So actually, the best site you can go to, and it's let me look it up, and then I'm going to tell you the actual site. But it's called Desire. It's North Carolina University put it together years ago. I always spell it wrong, and if you spell it wrong, it takes you to a website.
It's without the E. It's DSIRE. Desire. It's
Okay.
Desire without an E. And Jeremy's right. That's what I refer people to. They have rebates and incentives from throughout the whole country. They do a great job.
Yeah, but so the heat pump, what you get there is it's a 30% tax credit up to $2,000. And what I always tell people is, I'm not a tax professional. I think I have to technically tell you this. So go find out how that's going to work for you. But yeah, if you go on to that Desire site, you can punch in and you can see all the federal incentives. And there's some huge federal incentives, crazy stuff. Like you do a new service upgrade. If you're increasing your service, you can get up to a $1,200 tax credit there. So a lot of my customers are doing EV chargers and they're going to a bigger charger to support that. Well, you get a $1,200 tax credit. So.
Go ahead, Abraham. I think we're almost to 8. So you'll probably be the last question. Go ahead.
Just wonder whether where the SEU here is in Ann Arbor, the solar energy utility, and how if they have been talking about an SREX type of system in their microgrid ideas. Does anybody know that?
Is this the co-op that's going to try to start in Ann Arbor? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, or it's called the SEU.
A sustainable energy utility. It would be like a parallel utility that the city
Right.
runs. Parallel.
Okay, yeah, that's the co-op. Yeah.
Yeah, I haven't heard anything recently. I think they're still there was talk in Ann Arbor about maybe having a municipal utility, which would be very ambitious. And then the alternative proposal was the SEU. And I haven't heard anything recently because there's a lot of issues related to the city getting involved with doing that. And so I think it's a work in progress, basically. Has anybody here heard anything recently about the SEU?
I've seen signs around Ann Arbor, but I haven't heard anything more about it.
Okay.
Do you mind if I put my my email back up there again? I
Oh,
know a
no,
few
go right
people-
ahead. Yep.
Yeah, so I'll screen share for a second here. So
Sure.
I'm gonna grab that off.
It's 8 o'clock. I guess we'd have time for one more question if somebody has a question. Yeah, I don't see any hands. So
Well, and tell you a funny story. When you started talking about the with the solar and the as far as the utilities and how they should do this and that. So got a call a while back. I'm not going to say which automotive company, but they want to put in car chargers on one of their facilities where it's a lot of the prototype electric cars. Well, they reached out to DTE and DTE told them, you're going to have to figure out that power supply yourself. We don't have the capacity in that area. So they're now looking at putting in about 1.5 megawatts of solar to
Wow.
charge these vehicles because DTE won't even do it for them. And I couldn't laugh harder when I got that call and looked at the job. So,
Well, it's worse than that. Ford Motor
Oh, I know.
Company, Ford Motor Company located its battery manufacturing facilities in Tennessee and Kentucky in large part because DTE charges so high for industrial rates that it was more economical for Ford to relocate in in Kentucky and Tennessee because they have public power through the Tennessee Valley Authority.
Wow. Yeah.
well, thank you, Jeremy. This has been a great presentation, a great discussion, and thanks to everybody who attended. And next week, we don't expect to have a presentation on Thursday evening, but we would have one a couple weeks from tonight. So again, thank you, Jeremy. This has been a great presentation, a lot of good information, and hope to see everybody a couple weeks from now. Have a good evening. Take care.
Thanks a lot.